Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Resurrection Ministries. We're running a little bit behind schedule this morning, so I'm glad you're with me. I won't take a lot of your time today. I will let you have this great day. Mothers, soon to be mothers, mothers who are raising other people's children, my hat goes off to you. Happy Mother's Day. God bless you. Today, I'm going to roll just a little bit down the road here. We have great biblical examples of mothers, but today I want to share with you some things out of my life. I had 4 great women from my youth who made great contributions to who I am today. My great-grandmother, Anuas, came from Sweden when she was 24 years old, came in through the Boston, Massachusetts immigration station, 1904, with a 4-year-old child who was my grandmother. Now, Miss Anuas was full-blooded Swede. I still think she had that Viking heritage in her because my very first memories of her were walking around with that. She had a 12-inch butcher knife she carried with her everywhere she went. And I would sit, I remember, as far back as I can remember, being in her bedroom, and I would sit with her, and she would sing to me songs in Swedish, and then I learned Swedish as my first language from her. My great-grandmother watched me while my mom and my grandmother were at work. My grandmother, Naomi Paul, she was a pistol, but she loved Jesus, and she took me to make sure I was in Sunday school and took me to all of the things that in church I was supposed to have. I had a drug problem when I was younger. Yes, I was drugged to church every Sunday, whether I wanted to go or not. And usually I didn't want to go, but I got to sit with great-grandma and grandma until great-grandma passed away when I was 9. And that was hard on me. I learned what separation and sadness meant, because my mother, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my Aunt Elaine, and my mom, the 4 women in my life growing up that had such an awesome impact on me. I learned toughness that most people don't know. My grandmother was divorced when my mom was 6 years old. And she was the first woman accountant. They called them bookkeepers back then. That's when they didn't want to pay any more money. But my grandmother got a job as a bookkeeper. She learned how to speak English when she got here because her first language was Swedish as well. And they were sponsored by a family that in Chicago that was related. And they came over from Sweden through Boston and then settled in Chicago. And my grandmother worked as a bookkeeper for Chicago Bridge and Iron Company for almost 40 years. It was 1931 when she got the job at Chicago Bridge and Iron. My mom was 6. And my great-grandmother watched both my mom and my auntie and raised them. And like I say, great-grandmother was tougher than a $2 steak. She didn't go anywhere without that butcher knife in her hand, and you knew when she was angry because she just fussed. There would be more Swedish words there than I was supposed to know, but she ran the roost, and she kept things in check for my grandmother. When my grandmother came home, it was things, and I was very young. I was raised very young. My first memories growing up in Chicago were in that house at 105th and Aberdeen in downtown in the community of Roseland in Chicago. So I wouldn't meet my dad, my adopted dad, until I was 3. And my mom and I were a package deal. My auntie, she took me everywhere. Her and my Uncle David, they kind of helped mom out when she was in the beginning. And then when mom got married in 1955, my auntie took me to Chicago, from Chicago to New York City on a Douglas DC-3 propeller-driven airplane. And I got to sit in the cockpit with the co-pilot, and I rode on his lap, I think, all the way from Chicago to New York City. And I was so excited. I was hooked on airplanes from that day. But this was my youth growing up. And then my dad came, my mom and dad got married when I was 3. I was not my dad's child. He adopted me. My mom just stuck with me through thick and thin. She went through a lot just to keep me. So growing up, I had those 4 women in my life. Like I say, my great-grandmother passed away when I was 9. And so my grandmother really came over, and it hurt her a lot to lose her mom, but she was, like I said, she was tougher than a $2 steak too. She was very independent. She never remarried after divorcing my grandfather. And they stayed in touch, but it was at a distance. And she took care of me and made sure every Easter we had a new pair of shoes. She would take me down to Marshall Fields, and then my brother and sister too, as they came along. And she'd take us down to Marshall Fields. I remember going to Christmas, going to Marshall Fields, going up the 8 stories they had, and you had this winding staircase that went to the top of the store, and they had this Christmas tree that ran from the bottom all the way up, and then you got to go see Santa Claus at the other end. Yeah. So these are just memories that stick out from you, especially when you get 73 years old and you're starting to stare down the gun barrel of eternity. You start to understand there's some things that in your life. Growing up, I wasn't the easiest child to deal with, and my mother was a saint. My aunt was a saint. They took me everywhere, did everything they could to do to keep me well-rounded and not become a criminal. And there's a lot of things. The streets in Chicago, I like to run, and they kept me in church. They kept me. I didn't. My dad and I had a different relationship. I worked for him. He had a lot of things in his growing up that deprived him of a mother. And there's a lot there that I really can't go into because it's personal for the family. And even though most of them are all gone, excuse me, most of those are all gone. They're all departed. That we sit back, and today is a day of memories. And if your mother's not with you, you think about those. Now, I'll get to my mom in a second. It's a little tough. But my aunt never had any children, so she kind of quasi-adopted me. My mom and her sister, my aunt, kind of tag team me. There's a lot of issues that we all have growing up. But the point of the matter that I'm making is that God puts people in our lives that make a difference. The first person I learned strength from when I was very young was my great-grandma. She didn't play. She ruled that roost, and everything went with the way great-grandma wanted. And then as she got sick and she couldn't take care of herself, I watched my grandmother swing into that role. And even though after I was 3.5, I didn't live there anymore. I lived with my mom and my dad, who would adopt me and give me his name. And there were, series of changes. I mean, all change comes through crisis. But anybody wants to believe that or not. And the greatest changes in your life come from the greatest crises in your life. So, and this was God's intent. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to get to the point of the sermon here in a little bit. And I wanted to share this testimony with you first because it's so important. For what I'm going to say is dependent on where we are and what we do. So I had this elaborate design all fixed up, and I had notes and everything with it. But as it is, I got new internet service, and somehow my two computers are now no longer connected. And so I just realized that all the technical difficulties weren't going to go away, and I had to adapt and improvise and overcome. That's what my son, who was a Marine, told me. In the Army, we shoot, move, and communicate. Either way, those things stay with you for a lifetime. So my great-grandmother was with me for the first 9 years of my life. And then my grandmother stayed with me until she went home, until I left home. When I was 17, I joined the Army. And got tired of taking orders from my dad, so I joined the Army to be my own boss. Went to Vietnam when I was 18 and stayed in the service. And so when you're in the military, you're gone a lot. I managed to get home for some Christmases, but most of them I was gone. And those are the parts that really bother you. My aunt and uncle were very, very good to me. They treated me wonderful, like I was their own son. And as time went on, you grow, you change, you go through different things. And when I became a parent, then things started to change for me. And I had to go back. So you can't ask your dad to help you with girls, because my dad's favorite child was my sister. She still doesn't believe that to this day, but she was. And my mom had to spend a lot of time with my brother because he was pretty sick growing up. He had asthma so bad. That poor kid suffered and suffered and suffered. He was 4 years younger than me, and my sister was 6 years younger than me. So there was a big difference. But those 4 women that always were in my life, 3 as I got older. And you go through it, and then I leave and I'm gone. And I remember my grandmother passed away March 29th, 1985, and I was in Denver, Colorado. And I missed her funeral. And my grandmother was the cat's meow. Took me on my first vacation away from my parents. And when I was 15, I went around Lake Michigan with her. I had my driver's permit, and she knew I knew how to drive. And my grandmother was scary. There was just no other word to describe her scary, but she had the bravery of David facing Goliath. There was nothing that bothered that woman. She would march through hell with gasoline underwear on if she had to. So she was so funny, but she'd always say, "The Lord is with me. No one can be against me." And she stuck with those scriptures, and she gave me my love for scripture because she made me look things up. My mom, she made me look things up. I remember growing up and I had to get in the dictionary and find 5 words every day and use them in a sentence, starting with the letter A and going all the way through Webster's dictionary. I hated Noah Webster for a long time. I thought it was completely unuseful, illogical, ludicrous, if you would. But I write books and I write songs and I sing. My mom, she gave me my love for music. She was a professional singer. There was nobody in this world that I loved more than her. She was my hero. That woman taught me what it was really like to be a Christian, even though I wanted no part of it. I grew up in a Lutheran church with religion, and I didn't like religion, and I didn't like half the people that were in the church, and I had a pretty troubled youth. I grew up in trouble a lot. But I remember my pastor, he would say, "Stick with your mom, Carl. She's got you." And my mother could sing. Oh, could she sing? She used to sing professionally on the Mike Douglas show in Chicago. I ruined her career, but I'm trying to pay her back now. So she raised me. She made a conscious choice. She had a career that she could have taken, and she picked me. Why? Because she was a mother. And she's God's design of a mother. My mom never said a bad word about anybody. Not one. Matter of fact, I tell this story an awful lot. But she used to sing for funerals because she had a golden voice and people wanted her to sing for funerals. So she would go and sing for people's funerals and I would go with her. Sometimes I sang duets with her. I didn't like going to funerals. There were sad places and I just didn't like it. But I would go because she went and I would sing with her. And any chance I got to sing with my mom we were in like flint. And I wish I had some recordings. I wish I would have recorded her when I was young. But I didn't. And she would go through the house and every morning she'd sing, "Good morning, it's another happy day. Good morning to you. Good morning, it's another happy day. Good morning to you. The sun is gently shining, the skies are oh so blue, and I can't help just saying how much that I love you." I remember my brother throwing a pillow at her. But that's the way I woke up every morning. She taught me to wake up with a song in my heart. It's never left me. When I was in the middle of Vietnam getting shot at in the middle of a firefight, you know what I did? I started singing. Well, shooting too, but I started singing. All those things stick with you, the little bitty things that you don't remember. And on a day like today, we should maintain an attitude of gratitude. Some of y'all didn't have a real good mother. I understand that. But you got to respect the office. Because the Bible tells us, "You shall honor your father and mother, for the days upon the earth shall be long-lived and blessed." What that doesn't say, what it says by not saying is if you don't honor that office, even if they weren't good people, you have to honor because they put you on this earth. Doesn't matter the circumstances. I never got to meet my biological father. I found out who he was later on in life, but that subject just wasn't discussed. My mother went through a lot just to keep me. She wasn't strong like my grandmother was strong, but she was meek. That doesn't mean timid. Meekness means quiet strength. And I watched her demonstrate that quiet strength all the time. People would treat her unmercifully bad. She didn't know I was her muscle. But I never told her. There were some people that did some bad things to her, and all she did was say, "You just got to release forgiveness to them." She'd say, "Forgive them not, for they know not what they do." I said, "That's what Jesus said." And they probably were right, but that person knew exactly what they were doing to you, but she would never, ever say a bad word about him. What'd she do? She'd go pray for him. And I thought that was just the dumbest thing that anybody ever came up with till I found it in the Bible. So we were at this funeral one day, getting back to the story. And this guy, that had passed away, he was just the meanest old booger in the town. And they asked my mom to sing for his funeral because nobody else wanted to do it. They just didn't like it. He was just mean, bitter. And my mom said, sure. So she went in and she sang In the Garden and The Old Rugged Cross, a couple other songs. I sang the duets with her on those, so we did that. I was 17. And I had no sense of humor about anything. So we went in and they had this guy from our church that was there. And I literally worshiped the quicksand that man walked on. And he just always wanted to catch my mom talking bad about something. That was his whole goal in life. I convinced him that shouldn't be afterwards, but that's another story. I've already repented for it. It's okay. And he walked up to my mom after the funeral, and he said, well, what do you got to say about old so-and-so? And I won't repeat his name because there's people who still probably know him. And my mom stood there and looked, and she grabbed her chin like this, and she says, you know, he could sure whistle good. And I watched that man just wilt like somebody had hit him with a right cross, and just his knees buckled. And I took my little 4'11" mama's hand and I walked her out that door and I said, Mama, that's classy. You hurt him worse than I could have. And she tapped me on my arm. She said, wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, son. Let's go home. And I took her back home and I told my dad what happened. He just fell out laughing because he knew the guy. He said, come on, son, let's go. So, we got back home and then our activities. But what am I saying? What is mother? Well, the Bible tells us she's a parent, first of all. She's a wife to her husband. And in this day and age with divorce and separation and death and different things, that a lot of times are a wife and a husband in the same house. And I understand that. But that doesn't change the mother's role. Matter of fact, sometimes it increases it. And what the most amazing part of all this is, you watch this woman who, and women of today have changed. They really have, because they've had to. They've been forced into roles that were typically men's before. We made men act like women, and we made women act like men. And I know that's going to get a firestorm of activity from a lot of people. And some of that's good and some of it's not. I've always been a man's man, and until you get broken, I used to tell everybody, all the women that ever loved me either left or died, which was true. But mothers are a different breed. I had no idea what that was like, because men don't, until I had to become one. Was I a good mother? No. I flunked nurturing 101. I just, I was raised pretty hard. I, I went through a lot of things growing up that living in Chicago, some of that brings, and it's just, it toughens up your skin. But I watched my mom go through all of this stuff. Now, I didn't know how to dress my girls. I didn't know how to comb their hair. They didn't come with manuals, and it's amazing they turned out as good as they did because they did. They've overcome more stuff than should be humanly possible, and 92% of that was me. I claim ignorance, but I did the best I could. First thing I learned from my mother was you never leave or forsake anybody because that's what God's like. God never leaves you or forsakes you. And he put my mother and my grandmother and my auntie and all them women in my life who never, ever left me. Well, all the trouble that I get, all the stuff that happened, when I was gone, they prayed for me constantly because they loved me. And I didn't realize a long time ago that when you have to throw that investment into people, you start to change. The wonderful person my mother was never did. The wonderful person my grandmother was never did. My aunt, they never changed. They never got out of being themselves. Those maternal instincts were God-given and God-placed. The first thing is that he never leaves you or forsakes you. The second thing I learned from all four of those is that they love you unconditionally. It doesn't matter how you act. It doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter where you've been. I could have been a mass murderer and they would have still loved me. They wouldn't have approved of what I'd done, and they would have told me in no uncertain terms, that's not the way I taught you. That's not the way God wants you to be. But that's what a mother does. Even when people leave and forsake her, when you walk away and run, when you know so much that nobody can tell you anything anymore, when you get all haughty. Oh, I'm grown. Our kids tell us that a lot, and they're far from it. But you get them through it, and you do it the best you can. And mothers, how many runny noses did you wipe? How many times did you have to clean up regurgitation in the middle of the night? How many times did you hold your kids when they were burning up with fever, praying so they could get through the night? That's what a mother does. I had to learn that the hard way. So I got a real good appreciation for what my mother did. There's a lot. When I was growing up, she was still my hero. I know your dad's supposed to be your hero. My dad was my dad. He was tougher than nails itself. I always used to tease him. I said, you could eat a box of 10-penny nails and spit out a barbed wire fence. And he'd just sit there and smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't show hardly any emotion. My dad had went through some horrible stuff. Came back from Korea pretty messed up. Now, I understand what that's like. There's a lot of things I can tell you that I'm not going to because it's none of your business. But I will tell you this. I watched my mother work within horrible conditions. Remember my dad struggling to make it when we were young. I remember my mom taking a can of Campbell's chicken noodle soup and watering it down so it went enough for 3 ways. Well, she didn't eat. She waited until my dad came home, and then she made sure her and him ate together. Remember them days. I remember my mom, I have to wait on a new dress. I remember Mother's Day, 1964. My dad bought her a brand new dress, and she was the happiest woman alive. He'd never done anything like that. He didn't know how. And my grandmother took him in. She knew the size and took him out to Marshall Fields downtown and said, "Danny, you get this dress for her." And he did. He loved my mother. That's the other thing I will tell you. My dad was hard as nails. He didn't know how to show love. He went through a lot of horrible things in his life, especially things growing up. He was put in an orphanage from the time he was 3 till he was 6, separated from his brother. And he came back to the farm in Iowa and didn't have a mother. Well, he had one, but she had left my grandfather on the other side. Yeah, our family put the fun back in dysfunctional. Yes, they did. But my dad vowed never to leave my mom, and never, ever. There was one person in this world you never said a bad thing to, and that was my mother. If you ever wanted to see my dad come unglued, you say raise your voice to my mother, and that would leave you grounded. That means you were on the ground looking up at the ceiling, waking up somewhere in the middle between that. That's what being grounded meant with him. He did not play, and especially when it came to my mother. She was his queen. She was my hero. He taught me how to be a man. She taught me how to have manners. My aunt and my uncle took me to societal functions where I would sing from the time I was 5. It taught me what humbleness was meant. It taught me how when people tell you you've done a great job, just to smile and say thank you. It was all God. My mom taught me to pray like it all was up to God and work like it all was all up to you. My dad taught me hard labor. My mom taught me how to pray and bring things around. So what are mothers? Well, let's start with Eve. Eve was the mother of all nations, got a bad rap. She was blamed for something that she didn't have any idea about. Everybody for years has blamed Eve for biting the unforbidden fruit when she had no idea what the covenant actually said. And the man who had all the power and authority in the garden was standing right next to her. We've all preached this for years, like, Adam was off at McDonald's having a hamburger while the enemy was facing him, and it wasn't hers. So what? And I'm going to show you a little something here too. God never gave up on Eve. He had to put the punishment because there was consequences for separating yourself from God, which is exactly what they did with her husband. But because they were together, the consequence came together. So what does God do? He picks this 15-year-old virgin girl in Israel named Mary and says, I'm going to have you impregnated by the Holy Spirit, and we're going to save man. And he pulled the curse off women at the same time. That's how good God is. That's the essence of Mother's Day. What else did my mom teach me? My mom, my grandmother. My grandmother taught me that no matter what the circumstances were, no matter what hardships you face, you work through them. That God would never leave you or forsake you. He would never leave you without, as long as you put forth the effort and gave him credit, he would bless you for that. That's what I learned growing up. You know what? Those lessons have never changed. I watched my mom go from nothing. I watched my dad's business grow. I watched him get to the point where they had prosperity in their lives. I watched them go do the things until they got older. My mom stayed at home until I was in 8th grade. And then because things were a little tough, she went to work. Worst year of my life. I was used to eating good. We'd had, if we had pies, we ate all together at the dinner table. And my mom and dad would discuss things while we ate. There was no talking at the table except between those two. And then that's how my dad would catch up. There were no cell phones. You didn't have communications back in those days. The greatest invention they ever came up with was that extended cord on the phone. My dad could throw it at you when you were making too much noise, and it came back to you. Kidding. But that's where they did their talking. We learned that we had chores. My mom gave us things that we had to do, and Dad made sure we did them. And when my mom went to work, we had a lot more. And I was getting a little bit older, so I got to help out a little bit more. I worked for my dad on the weekends and sometimes after school. He was a painter. I was supposed to be a painter. Can I tell a little secret? I hated it. Did not want to do that. So, but we got through it. My mom would say, it's going to be all right. So what else is a mother? A mother is an encouragement. Let's take Sarah. She had Abraham that she had to watch over. You love your husband when you're 90 years old and you have a baby. He was honored. I want to know what kind of Viagra that was. Just kidding. It's like it was the Holy Ghost. Bible says her womb had been dead, but because she believed God and was counted under righteousness, she became the mother of all nations. Just like Deborah, who was the mother of Israel, she was their judge. When they say when women ain't supposed to be in leadership positions, then God should have never put that part where Deborah was the judge in all of Israel. Because she was the one and the best one they had since Joshua had passed away 300 years before that. What is a mother? She's an administrator. She's a counselor. She's an advisor. And the guy, Barak, who went to war with Deborah, came back and said, Deborah said, I ain't going with you. She said, you are going with us or we're not going to fight. She was that important to Israel that the man who was general of their armies refused to go to battle without her. My dad would have refused to go fight each day to do what he did if he didn't have my mother. No joke. So what I'm saying is, what else is a mother? Well, we know that she's the mother of all nations. We know that she's the mother of all living. But what qualities do you have to do that? You have to have faith. You have to have belief that there's going to be something better. You have to be able to face tragedy. Look at Eve. Her own son, her oldest son, killed her youngest son. You have to deal with loss. And God gave her another one named Seth. Made her to rejoice. What is a mother? Mother is one that sometimes has to bury her children. And I told a lady one time, she lost her daughter, and I told her, I said, you know what? I've never lost a child. I don't know what that heartache feels. I've had students that died, and I know how that felt, but it wasn't one of my own raising that I brought up. And that horror still bypasses me. But I tell you, I told her, I know how God feels. He felt so bad, he darkened the earth for 6 hours and took his faith because he couldn't stand to watch his son on that cross. And you can tell me anything you want to. You can tell me that's the way it was supposed to be. But I will tell you that the loving God I know made women to be mothers, to show that same compassion. And he made them strong enough to endure that same hurt. Mother sometimes has to not only watch their children die, but their husband. Mothers are built pretty tough. Do they cry a lot? Yes. Is that weakness? Absolutely not. Tears are the window washing fluid of heaven. And if you cry enough, sooner or later, you get to the point where you can start rejoicing. What you sow in tears, you'll reap in gladness. Pour in the oil of joy for the spirit of heaviness. Lift up your eyes. Lift up your voice to God. Pray in the spirit and with understanding. Let's magnify the Lord. What else are mothers? Mothers are people that don't quit until the job's done. I don't care if you're 4, 40, or 64. If your mom's still alive, you're still her daughter. And I wish both my daughters a happy Mother's Day today before I started with the service. And every year I thank them for putting up with me. When they were younger, they used to send me Mother's Day cards on Mother's Day. I had to do everything I could do to keep from cracking. My mother, she went home on May 12th, 2002, Mother's Day. That was my mom. She stayed until she knew the job was done. I was teaching in Odessa, Texas. I didn't get to talk to her before she went. I was mad at God for a long time. But a week before she passed, I talked to her because I talked to her on Sundays. And a week before she passed, she'd say, "Oh, honey, you're going to be just fine. Don't cry for me. I'm going to heaven." And yes, she did. And my great-grandmother and my grandmother and my mom were all there. And that I would have loved to have seen that homecoming. But I will one day. My aunt passed in 2012 in January. And she was the last one of the 4 women to go home. And my dad, who was probably the toughest man I ever met in my entire life, I watched him break down that day and cry like a baby. Never had seen that before. With tears running down his face, he looked at me, he said, "That was the only woman that ever loved me. And now she's gone. What do I do?" I grabbed him by the hand, told him, "God's going to get us both through this. You're going to be okay." And I called him up on Sundays to see how he was doing. And my brother lived up north in Chicago, and he would come down and see him every couple of weeks, make sure he was okay. And my dad lived until July 14th, 2012, and he went home to be with the Lord, but we got him saved before he went. Because you know the one thing that he wanted the most? This is how we led him to the Lord. My niece actually led him through the prayer. But I told him, Dad, he said, I'm never going to see your mother again. He's literally laying on her grave crying. This man who never, ever cracked. Never. I had to pull him off that grave and pick him up. And watched him put his arm around me and sob just like a baby. And trust me, I know how that feels. Yeah. And I told him, I said, you get to see her, you know, all you got to do is make Jesus your Lord and Savior and stop all this silliness. He said, really? He said, but I've done so many people so wrong. And he said, I've done you so wrong. I said, don't worry about small stuff, Dad. I wasn't the easiest child in the world to raise. And if anybody needs to repent, it's me. Because I put you through living hell. He said, really? 2 months later, my niece led him to the Lord. I got to preach his funeral. Got to speak at my mom's funeral. Yeah. Sometimes your kids run off and leave you. And mothers have to deal with that. There's so many things that we expect of women. But if you ever had to go through half of it, you wouldn't do the things you do. So today, while you're sitting there resting at home, maybe go read about Mary. Go read about Sarah. Go read about Rebecca. Rebecca was Isaac's husband, and Isaac was blind in one eye and couldn't see out the other. But he learned to trust his hunger and his gut instead of listening to God. And Rebecca went and switched the blessing to what God had told her than what man had told her. Read about those. Read about Naomi, who took her daughter-in-law, her son's widow, back to Israel and was redeemed and got them in and got her daughter Ruth in the lineage of Jesus. Married to Boaz. Yeah. Boaz and Ruth created Jesse, and Jesse created David. David killed some giants. Think about Bathsheba, Solomon's wife, who was taken by David in an act of adultery by force because he was a king and he could. And then how God gave her Solomon, and she raised the wisest man in the Bible. Think about the adversity you went through. Think about the adversity your mother went through just to be with you. And if you haven't called her today or went and saw her today, if you're too far away to go see her, call her up and say, happy birthday, Mom. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Merry Christmas, Mom. Be there as much as you can. Because the hand that rocks the cradle really rules the world. We can say we do. I remember when Deborah and I got married, and My son came to live with us. She just took over as being mom and did everything and tried to be raise him the way that you do. And he's a teenager and he didn't want to listen, but we had a learning period we had to go through. But she didn't wince. And her and my son became closer than two peas in a pod. Got to the point she started yelling at me for yelling at him, and we ain't doing that. Like, no, we don't cross that line. But those of you that know me and know my story, you know all the backdrop of this. So those of you that don't, you won't need to, don't ask. So what I'm going to tell you today is this. No matter what happened, no matter if your mother was good to you, bad to you, anything, if you don't talk to her anymore, that's fine. Just thank God that she had you. Be grateful. And thank God he got you where you needed to go. If you had a great mother like I did, you thank God for her every day. Because when they're gone, you don't get to see them again unless you're going where they're going. I hope you've enjoyed this sermon today. Let me ask you, if those of you, my mother would say, make sure you give Jesus glory for everything. And I did. So I'm going to ask you today to make a declaration of faith. Would you say this with me? Father, in Jesus' name, I thank you for giving me my mama. I know, Lord, that your son Jesus died on the cross, took all my sins down to hell with him, and rose from the grave 3 days later. I know in my heart this is true. I speak it with my mouth. From this day forward, I'm saved. And every time you say that, everybody in heaven has a party, which means they do a lot of partying. So take this day. Take that mama, put your arms around her and tell her that you love her. Show her that you love her. Be there for her as she gets older. Have a blessed and highly favored day. This is Pastor Carl D. Papp Sr. from Resurrection Ministries in Floresville, Texas, saying, God bless you. Have a great day. And we'll love you. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.